What exactly is tempo in the game of basketball? What tempo do you and your team play at? What tempo should you be playing at? The answers to these questions are what we're going to talk about in today's episode. And the answers might just surprise you. A better understanding of tempo and its effects on the game are critical to you boosting your basketball IQ and becoming a better player. So let's jump in and discuss. Welcome back to Hard Smart Together. I'm Coach Dave. I'm here every week to help you become a better basketball player by teaching about the mindset, the basketball IQ, and the fundamentals that will not only help you play better, but will help you achieve your goals faster and help you enjoy the game more. So, today we're going to talk about tempo as it relates to the game of basketball. And we're going to cover the questions I talked about in the intro. We're going to talk about a specific definition of tempo and how most players, really don't have a great understanding of what tempo is. We're going to talk about, maybe what tempo you're playing at, what teams benefit from a slow tempo versus a fast tempo. We're going to dive into all those topics, but we're going to talk about tempo in general. Now, this is a deeper discussion that we'll have in future talks because there's a lot of nuances within the game that tempo affects. But, let's start off by just talking about, what most people think when you bring up the word tempo. And this is most players. They really don't have a great understanding of tempo and its effects on the game. If you ask most players, very few players have an understanding of it. But if you ask most players, what's your definition of tempo? They're going to give you somewhat of a vague answer. Well, it's how fast you play. It's how fast you push the ball up the court. It's how you fast break. I mean, there's a number of different answers, but typically it's a vague answer that doesn't really cover what tempo is. So today, let's give you a very specific definition of tempo in the game of basketball so that you can have that as a base of knowledge and we can work from there. So a specific definition of tempo is the number of offensive possessions that each team gets during a period of time. So again, the number of offensive possessions that each team gets given a given amount of time during the game. So we're talking about possessions. We're not talking about speed necessarily, although we refer to tempo as being a fast tempo or a slow tempo. So let's put that in context. In today's NBA, possessions have gone up over the years. But in today's NBA, let's look at who has what we refer to as the fastest tempo or the most possessions in the game, and who has the slowest tempo or the least amount of possessions in the game on average throughout the year. So today's NBA, the average number of possessions is right around 100 possessions in a game. And the team that has the highest tempo is the Washington Wizards. Now, the team that has the lowest tempo is the Denver Nuggets. Now, that's really interesting. And we'll come back to that later because it's really interesting which team has the fastest tempo in the league and which team has the lowest tempo in the league. Now, in a high school game, because a lot of you guys probably play in high school or college, but let's use high school as an example. 100 possessions over the course of a high school game is really a fast tempo. And 60 possessions over the course of a high school game is really slow tempo. So now we have kind of a range, and now you have a specific definition for tempo, and now we can talk about it, in more detail. So, as I mentioned, a lot of players will have a pretty vague answer to, what their definition of tempo is. Well, one thing to understand is tempo has absolutely nothing to do with how fast you push the ball up the court. Okay? It is not about dribbling fast up the court. It's not about passing fast up the court. It has nothing to do with pushing the ball. It has to do with number of possessions. Okay? So, walking the ball up the court does not necessarily mean you have a slow tempo. Pushing the ball up the court does not necessarily mean you play at a fast tempo. So that's a big confusion with tempo, is how fast you play. And you as an individual player, it does not mean that if you want to play a slower tempo game, you are necessarily going to play slowly. You're going to run slow. You're going to dribble slow. You're not going to pass the ball. That is not what tempo means. That's not what slowing the tempo means. It's interesting, Coach Wooden, John Wooden, probably the most famous coach, basketball coach ever, had a saying: play quickly, but don't hurry. Play quickly, but don't hurry. That was not a reference to tempo of the game. That was just a reference to how he wanted his players to play and how he recommended that basketball players play. So, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about tempo. We're trying to get you a baseline of knowledge. We're trying to get you a definition of tempo, what it means. But in general, we want to talk about, what teams benefit from playing a faster tempo versus a slower tempo. And in general, we can talk about, who has an advantage with a faster tempo. Hey, I'll get back to the episode in just a second. I hope you're enjoying today's episode, and if you are, please share it. Share it with a player, share it with a parent, share it with a coach, anybody that you feel might need to hear it. I also wanted to give you a free gift that I've made available to you just for hanging out with me today. It's a checklist of skills for basketball players that want to become a better player, a better teammate, and to stand out to their coaches. Now, these skills are skills that are often overlooked, but they can be the foundation that a player can use to really achieve their goals. You can download it at hardsmarttogether.com/intangibles. I'll put a link below in the description as well, but it's hardsmarttogether.com/intangibles. Now let's jump back to today's episode. The better team always has an advantage in a faster tempo game. Now think about that for a second. The better team always has an advantage in a faster tempo game. And why do we say that? Because there's more possessions. So the better team's skill sets, the better team's abilities are going to come out over the course of more possessions. Okay? So I want to really drive that point home by using an extreme. Usually you can kind of see, is that right or is that wrong, based on using an extreme. So the extreme I want to use is, I don't care what team you're playing on right now. You could be in a grade school team. You could be on an AAU team. You could be in a high school team, a college team. It doesn't matter. In a one-possession game, your team has a chance against an NBA All-Star team. So how's that so? You say, how are we going to have a chance against an NBA All-Star team? Let me explain. Let's say that jumping center is Joel Embiid. So he's probably on the All-Star team, although he's injured right now, but he would be on the All-Star team, and he jumps center, and he's probably gonna control the tap. And that ball is going to go to, let's say, LeBron James. Now, LeBron James is going to go right around one of your teammates. And LeBron James is got like 3 different options right now. He can drive in and probably dunk over you because, let's face it, he's LeBron James. Or he's got Steph Curry sitting out at the 3-point line. And Steph Curry is the greatest shooter who ever lived, so he could kick it out to Steph and Steph could drain a 3. Or he's got Giannis running the baseline and running the other wing, and he could lob it to Giannis, and Giannis could dunk over you or one of your teammates. So lots of options. But what happens? LeBron, unbelievably, didn't tie his shoe very tight. And his shoe came untied, and he trips before he gets a chance to do any one of those 3 options. And when he trips, he loses the ball. And all of a sudden, you find it right in your hands. You look up, and lo and behold, there's a teammate that's cherry picking at the other end of the court. Nobody's guarding them. And so you pass the ball the length of the court. Your teammate gets the ball, layup. You guys win the game. 1-possession game. You guys have a chance. Probably not a great chance, because what are the odds that, he's going to trip over his, shoelace? But let's just be honest. You have a chance. In a 1-possession game, anything can happen. The more possessions that game goes, the more the NBA All-Star team is going to have a chance. And all those things that we described, those options for LeBron, are going to come true, and they're probably going to run all over your team because they're the better team. So, the faster tempo in a game, the more possessions, the better team has a better opportunity to win the game. So how do you speed up tempo or slow down tempo? How do you control tempo? And why would you control tempo? So controlling tempo, as I mentioned, is not about how fast you as individual players play or how fast you play, how much you push the ball. It's about longer possessions. Longer possessions on the defensive side of the ball and longer possessions on the offensive side of the ball. And what do I mean by that? So on the defensive side of the ball, you can control possessions by getting back on defense and playing really good, solid half-court defense. Okay? Now there's a number of, defenses that are designed, and these are, coach strategy decisions, defenses that are designed to really make an offensive team against you work and lengthen that possession and make it difficult to score. There's other defensive schemes that are designed to speed up the game and to go out and, pressure and trap and turn the ball over and get the game going faster and shorten these defensive possessions. As well with offensive possessions, there are how do you lengthen offensive possessions? You look for better shots, right? It's not about how fast you got it up the court. It's about how picky you are with what shots you take, okay? Now, there are coaches and strategies that want to speed up the game, and you might take quicker shots. And then there are offenses that take, a full shot clock because they're looking for a great shot. Now, that doesn't mean they're not opportunistic. They're going to take the open layup at the beginning of the shot clock. But they look for really great shots. So that's how you control tempo. You control tempo by lengthening defensive possessions and by lengthening offensive possessions. Now, I'm of the opinion that great teams, they can change the tempo of the game within the game based on situations. Great coaches are really good at situational tempo control. But here's where you come in as a player. As a player, now that you know what tempo is and really how to control it, you need to be able to recognize situations in the game. And these are situations we'll get into in future talks because I wanted to give you a general idea of what tempo is today. So, tune in if you haven't subscribed or signed up for being notified when the new episodes come out, you should do that, because we'll talk about very specific instances within games, very specific situations where you can recognize and help your coach being a coach on the floor by controlling tempo. And I want to give another example of why tempo is so important. I don't know if you guys remember a few years back in the NCAA tournament, first round, a 16 seed had never beaten a number 1 seed. Now, I thought that it was primed to happen with a matchup that it actually happened in. So, number 1 Virginia played number 16 seed UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, so UMBC. And why did I think that could happen? Because Virginia plays a defensive philosophy and an offensive philosophy that slows the tempo of the game. I think they do that intentionally because I think, they might not be the best team in their league. They play with, the Dukes and the North Carolinas and, great teams in their league. So they needed to even the playing field by slowing the tempo. But in a tournament situation, slowing the tempo and not being able to adjust to playing a team that's not as good as them, they didn't adjust, and therefore it gave an opportunity for UMBC to upset them, which they did, which I didn't fully predict, but I said this is one of the times it could happen. And sure enough, it happened. Now, the interesting thing is Virginia came back the next year and won the national championship. So, slower tempo helped them the next year because they didn't change their tempo. They didn't change their schematics. They just did better. But it gave a 16 seed a chance against a number 1 seed. So remember, what is tempo? Now you have a definition. It has to do with the number of possessions over a given period of time. And, you want to slow down tempo, you want to speed up tempo. It has nothing to do with the speed at which you're playing. If you're playing quickly, it has to do with the length of possessions. So now that you know this, I'd love for you to comment comment below. I'd love to hear, now that you know this, what do you think of that definition and versus maybe what your definition was going into today's discussion? And on top of that, what do you think is the speed at which, or the tempo at which your team plays? Do you guys play a fast tempo? Do you guys play a slow tempo? So I'd just love to hear your comments. I want to get this going to be interactive. Would love to hear from you. And so hopefully this was helpful and a great step in boosting your basketball IQ. And until next time, be sure to play hard, play smart, and most importantly, play together. See you later.